Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that you've joined me in today's practice. I'm very grateful, as always. And welcome. As always, it's nice to start with a bell, because in a way the bell, it can symbolize a movement from one segment of our day into another, into this segment right now that began with the bell. This segment where we remind ourselves that we've come together to sit together, to breathe together, to practice together. I know we came here to meditate. We came here to perhaps even learn something about mindfulness. But before we begin, we remind ourselves that these are only labels. And very often with labels, they are the tools of the mind. And because many of us have come to an understanding as to what meditation is, what mindfulness is. Of course, many of you have practiced with me before, and some of you are new. But we've all heard the words. We've heard the word mindfulness being used. We've heard the word meditation being used. And that means the mind has accumulated its own meanings, its own glimpses as to what should happen today as we sit together practicing meditation, practicing mindfulness. And sometimes that can be the biggest obstacle in a practice, when you enter into it with an expectation. Because some of us have had wonderful meditations in the past. And so the mind has decided that's what a meditation should be like. Incredibly still mind, and my thoughts didn't bother me. The same with mindfulness. And the reason I say that it can be an obstacle and a hindrance is simply because when we sit down together today, there's a mold that's been created, and we're going to try to fill it. And anything that doesn't fit into the mold is going to make us feel uneasy, agitated. And so why don't we get rid of all of these labels and just arrive here as we find ourselves with absolutely no expectation. Because in this practice, even the facilitator, myself, I'm always meant to remember that to treat this as my first practice ever. Beginner's mind. One of the most essential qualities in this practice. It's where this becomes my first practice. No matter how many times I've done it before, I release them. And I invite you to release your previous practices as well, so that whatever happens as we sit together, we will allow, and simply ease ourselves through this practice. As always, these past few weeks have been rather unusual because most of us have been in our home environments for weeks now. We've been working from home. If you have cleaners, the cleaners have stopped coming most likely, and you've been doing your own cleaning, the chores. And if you live with somebody, or even if you're in regular contact with somebody, there are the residue of conversations, the residue of thoughts floating around your room. And so to make the most of this practice, let's arrive at this particular spot we find our bodies in, because it is separate from those other spaces in your home or your flat or your room. Even if you live in a room, this particular spot is quite unique. You've never quite sat here in this way with my voice speaking to you about this practice, and so it's a new experience. And so just feel your body's arriving at this spot. You can ask gravity for a little bit of help by just noticing how, as you release your muscles, as you loosen your muscles, as you loosen your skin, as you begin to balance your body, align your body, hopefully comfortably, we release our bodies to gravity. And so if you'd like me to talk you through it, then maybe begin with the facial muscles. Just loosening and relaxing the facial muscles. And then the neck. The shoulders. Many different muscles within the shoulders. Watching them drop under the weight of the arms as you loosen that tightness, that tension. And then the arms, which have so many different muscle groups as well. Relaxing, loosening. Noticing where the arms are resting, where the hands are resting. What you can feel through the tips of your fingers. Back to the shoulders. The chest, the back. The muscles around the stomach, the sides, the lower back, the upper back. Resigning, letting go. the pelvic region, legs, knees, calves and shin, soles of the feet themselves all the way down to the tips of the toes. Surrendering, releasing, letting go. Allowing gravity to now take over and do more of the work. Hopefully all we have to do is just balance. And in a way we are helping the mind by doing this, by relaxing the body, because what often happens is there is a very deep connection between the mind and the body. You would probably notice that when you get angry, when you get nervous, when you feel stress, you'll find the pace of your breathing changing. You'll find certain areas within your body becoming tense. For me, I can tell you it's my jawbone, my teeth grinding against each other, my forehead, my scalp, wrinkles appearing. And what we do when we relax our bodies is that we reverse the order, and by relaxing the body, little knots become undone within the mind. Doesn't matter whether you can feel it. But let's surrender our bodies once again to gravity, and then continue arriving in this particular spot by noticing those points of contact between the body and the surface underneath it. You may be sitting on a chair. You may be sitting on a mat or a cushion. You might even be lying down in bed. There are no rules in this practice. So long as you feel that you are being kind enough to yourself, kind enough to your body. Let's continue exploring these points of contact between our bodies and the surfaces underneath us, which somehow at this moment are reminding us that we have arrived at this particular spot in the room, in the dining room, in the study, wherever it is you find yourself. Notice how nice it is to be supported by this surface. It's almost as though every ounce of weight that gravity cradles, that gravity gently pulls down, seems to be reversed by the surface underneath us. Most of us might find ourselves on top of a softer surface, a cushion, a chair. And if you are, just notice how it molds to the shape of your body, supports you. Might even be a nice time to just simply be grateful for this incredible cushion underneath us that might have been created by hand or machine, but nevertheless It somehow adds to our level of comfort. And if you're sitting on a hard surface, then how incredible it is that your body is able to mold itself to this surface, again supporting you. We have arrived, haven't we? If you still find it difficult to separate yourself from all those things around you, those memories, then with your mind's eye, the mind is a powerful tool. And so we create a little bubble around us with a nice supply of oxygen, of course. But something that somehow helps us to isolate ourselves in this point. Somehow feeling that little bit lighter. As all those things that need to be done somehow fade away. And we begin to arrive more fully into this space that we created for ourselves. So that we can simply be as we are sitting, which we know so well how to do. And breathing. Again, something we've been doing since the day we were born, breathing. Delicious breath. What would it feel like to breathe in deliciously? Why don't we explore our breath in this way? How nice it is to feel the flow of the air as it enters into our bodies through our nostrils. Just breathing at your normal pace. The only difference being the level of awareness, the level of consciousness of every sensation. Every sensation magnified. How the breath, how it eases its way in through the entrance of the nostril. Remind yourself that it's the sensations that we seek to experience. We're not here to think about the breath. But to experience the sensations, because thinking about the breath can turn into a very boring exercise. So we're here to explore every breath as though it were the first breath. With that right level of curiosity, with that level of interest. How it flows up the nasal passage. Can you detect any any of the new surfaces against which the breath brushes against. How deep up into the nasal passage can you still experience this flow? And beyond the nasal passage, how it somehow seems to move down the airways of the throat, you will notice the rising and the falling of the chest wall, but let's go all the way down to the stomach. Noticing how as we breathe in, the stomach wall seems to rise up. The stomach seems to balloon. And at what point does the in-breath turn into an out-breath? Being a little bit curious, does it happen immediately, straight away, or is there a pause in between? Cradling every breath as though it were a delicate feather, experiencing, noticing, tuning into. And as the breath flows out, the sensations of it. Up the airways, down the nasal passage, through those exit points at the end of the nose, the nostrils. This time also brushing against the upper lip. At least for myself, it does. The temperature of the breath. Its interactions with the skin, with the upper lip. With the sensitive membranes within the nasal passage, as it brushes against the tiny hairs at the tip of the nostrils that somehow aid us in filtering dust. We remind ourselves at this stage that it's very normal for the mind to drift away in its thoughts. And if that happens, it's completely normal. You're not failing in your practice. I'm not failing in my practice. And we remind ourselves that. because we remind ourselves that over the past few minutes we've spent moments arriving in this space, and to a large degree we've stopped moving, as in our bodies are relatively still, and so the vessel is fairly still. And we call this a practice because we rarely get an opportunity to still ourselves, at least physically, so that we can watch our minds. And when we notice our minds continuing to move, we smile because we remember that this practice is here simply to enable us to observe these movements. We call that the momentum of the mind. And today's practice is about observing this momentum. Noticing these movements. Not wrestling, not forcing these thoughts to go silent or still. But simply to develop a new relationship with our mind. From this point onwards, from right now, this moment, this new relationship with the mind is one in which we begin to observe it from a space that's so much larger than the thought process, that thinking process. This can be a slightly difficult concept to grasp, even for those of you who are very advanced in this practice, because the mind is an invisible entity. But its images are so real, so vivid. And we all know how often we get caught up in those storms and its movement. And because it's so abstract, it's sometimes nice to use metaphors, images, and one that I like and that I often use in this practice is that of clouds, where we know what clouds look like, and they come in so many different shapes. And as you hear my words, you can visualize the clouds that arise within your mind's eye. These images, clouds of different shape, different size, different shades of color. They move at different speeds as well, depending on whether or not there is a storm, whether or not there are strong winds. And then sometimes there are no clouds and there's just the stillness of a blue sky or the stillness of the night sky. But what often happens, if you've ever felt anger, if you've ever felt upset, or any of those other emotions that society has somehow labeled as unpleasant. We're not here to label them as unpleasant. We're just here to observe. But if you have ever experienced, what often happens is that we begin to identify ourselves as these clouds. And it can get very confusing sitting at the center of these sometimes gray and stormy clouds. There's very little clarity. And some of these clouds, they're in the future, planning, worrying about some possibility that may never happen. And some of these clouds, they're from the past, reliving events, sometimes traumas, troubles from the past. Very rarely in this present moment. And what this present moment feels like, which is what this practice is about, stepping into this present moment. This present moment begins to feel like the gaps between the clouds. And so from the clouds, we gently ease ourselves through our awareness. Initially, it'll begin with an awareness that I'm within the cloud. Wait a second, I'm inside of this cloud. What am I doing in here? I can't see anything. I'm suffocating. There's thunder, deafening thunder and lightning. I'm in the middle of this cloud, and it begins with an awareness that you're thinking. And then you find the gaps between the clouds, and then you step outside of the cloud, and then you begin to become aware. And then the process of observation, the witnessing, the sense of presence, the sense of awareness, which so many teachers refer to. And then it begins with the gaps. And then you begin spending more time within these gaps. And when I say time, it's a bit contradictory because you're stepping outside of time into this now moment, now, that continuously arrives. And then from the space in between the clouds, you begin to notice that there is space underneath the clouds. And then you very gently relax even more as you begin to realize how much more spacious you are. Whereas earlier you were just those little clouds in the sky. But now you've become the space underneath the clouds. It's a little bit more, it's very much more clearer from here. You can see the form of the cloud, you can see its shapes, its sizes, its speed, but you're not being carried away by them. And then you notice the space above the clouds. Now this This is a very special part because it seems almost endless. Trillions and trillions of stars, systems with incredible beauty. And as you begin dissolving into this space, an even larger smile appears on your lips as you begin to understand this relationship with the mind. All those events from our past, all those anxieties and fears about the future, still there, still very real, but there's a new way of experiencing it from this space that's so much vaster, larger. But what makes this space even more special is that within this space we find kindness. I don't know what kindness means to you, but whatever it means to you, it's a nice word. And so there is the understanding that comes with kindness. And then there is wisdom. The wisdom that will present the solutions to many of the questions that we have, the problems, the obstacles, anything at all that troubles you. And we simply rest in this space. I mentioned the word kindness. Very often we associate the word kindness with the acts that we carry out towards those around us. And that is very valid, that's true. But this kindness is also a kindness that we show to ourselves, that we allow ourselves to experience. Where we release all those. When you do find yourself, that self-critical voice, that voice that says that, for example, now it might be saying, you're not practicing as well as you should be, you've done better before. You're not good enough, you don't look a certain way, you don't talk a certain way. That endless chatter within the mind, you know that every time there is a critical voice arising, that's the mind with all its accumulated memories from well-meaning parents, well-meaning, well, not always, but sometimes well-meaning teachers, who thought they were judging us and creating standards. that would help us to be better achievers. But all of these are within the clouds. And just for these brief moments that we are practicing together, we choose to step outside of these voices, these thoughts, where there is only acceptance. Allowing, because in this moment, when we step into this space around the clouds, this now moment, all standards suddenly disappear. You couldn't be better looking. You couldn't be more beautiful, more handsome. Because there's only the now. And what you find in the now is perfection. And then the advertising industry, which tells us you need different things in order to be fulfilled. Again, the mind. Because in this moment that we call the now, there's nothing to compare our bank balance, our possessions against. Everything's perfect once again. Even those labels that doctors have given you, I don't know what it is, whether it's some physical ailment or some mental health label that a doctor has given us. Again, it dissolves, whether it's diabetes or manic depressant, labels. Because in this present moment, there's only perfection. There's no standard against which anyone can ever compare us to. And so once again we find perfection, stillness, silence. And whatever physical or mental ailment it is that you have been labeled, in this state of awareness, in this state of presence, if it is mental health, the dust begins to settle. Those voices begin to slow down. They begin to be full quiet. And if it's a physical ailment, in the stillness, your immune system begins to rise. The intelligence within every cell contained in your body, it begins to aid in your recovery. So we let go. In a moment, I'm going to ring the bell. And it's not the end, it's just going to be an opportunity to stretch your bodies, to move into a more comfortable posture, or maybe to just, like right now, just probe through your body, explore your body. Which parts of the body could use with a nice, comfortable massage that you could give with one or both of your hands? I'm sure if you're anything like me, I used to exercise a great deal more before this lockdown. I've just only started a few days ago. But that sometimes means that when you listen to your body, certain parts might be feeling a little bit tighter than others. And so you're going to give yourself, once you hear the sound of the bell, you're going to give your bodies an opportunity to stretch, to loosen that part of the body, to do anything at all. The only requirement is that you feel just a little bit more comfortable as you do it, and after you do it, hopefully. If you would like to bring a sense of continuity to this beautiful practice, then see if you can tune into the movements within your body and the sensations around your body as you move. The shifting in balance. Which muscles are contracting and tightening? And if some muscles are tightening, then the other muscles are loosening, aren't they? And expanding on the other side. And then there are the joints, the elbows, the knees, the wrist, the neck. Some of you may feel that these movements are a little bit disruptive to the practice because you can get very stable and very comfortable in being still sometimes. But we just remind ourselves how important movements are, because we spend almost most of our waking day moving from one place to another, or one part of the house or room to another. The joints are moving, the muscles are moving. The purpose of that very short practice was just to remind us how we can turn every movement into an incredible tool, an incredible opportunity with which to step outside of our thought process and be more present in this moment, where the kindness is, where the stillness is, most importantly, where the wisdom is. And I don't know how you normally wake up in the morning, because some of us wake up with very strong bouts of the mind's momentum. It just depends on what you were thinking about just before you went to sleep, went to bed. And so that movement that we just experienced, that movement meditation, it's a very beautiful experience when those last few moments before you go to bed, when you gently begin to step outside of your thoughts and into your bodies, you will find yourself slowing down the momentum of the mind. And why is this relevant? Only because you may find yourself going to sleep that little bit more peacefully, perhaps leaving behind all those, whatever it is your work put you through, whatever it is families or friends put you through during the day. Most of it nice, no doubt, but some of it sometimes a little bit iffy. And so those last few moments before we go to bed, we begin to become conscious of the soles of our feet, the way they carry us, the surface underneath us, whether it's hard flooring, carpeting, how soft, how hard is the carpeting? Is it tiled flooring? Is it wooden flooring? How soft, how hard? How do we walk? Every step becomes an incredible opportunity because of the number of coordinated movements, the shift in balance, where you move from one foot to another as one foot moves forward, different muscles coordinating themselves. As you enter into the bathrooms where you're about to brush your teeth or wash up before bed, noticing the running water coming from the tap, its temperature, the way in which it reflects light. And if you were incorporating beginner's mind into this experience, what would it feel like to see a tap? What would it feel like to see running water for the first time? Doesn't that help us to realize how much we live in our mind? Because it's so easy to not notice these things, simply because what we see, we somehow manage to place it directly into our memory banks, completely bypassing and not experiencing the nowness of it. And so we experience for the first time. We experience our beds for the first time. The weight of the blanket, its warmth, its comfort, the way in which the mattress cradles and comforts our bodies. Every one of these sensations, opportunities to rest, to step outside of the thought process. And then, most importantly, reminding you that it is a practice when you still wake up the next morning agitated and with a tremendous momentum. Because we remind ourselves constantly, and you've heard me say it throughout today's practice, this is a practice, it's a practice, it's a practice, because we're not meant to be perfect. And practice denotes that as we do it the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time, the momentum continues to slow down gradually, sometimes quite sudden. Like right now, as we practice together. But we step outside of those clouds into the space where there is patience. Observing, noticing, whatever momentum we find. And if you'd like to call that a practice that you can take with you for this evening, why not? What do we have to lose? In a moment, I'm going to ring the bell. And I've really, truly enjoyed today's practice. And even though the bell is going to symbolize close to our group practice, we'll just remind ourselves that this practice continues, because the day is going to unfold before us from moment to moment to moment, different segments. Just as we entered into a segment following the initial ringing of the bell, our day is comprised of so many different segments. And so we're going to continue observing. Having had this opportunity to sit together and tap into this awareness, this presence, this stillness, this space, we didn't use any new tools. We didn't use any new toys. We simply used our breath. We used our various senses as doorways into this present moment. Our sense of touch, our sense of hearing, our sense of sight, and sometimes even using our mind as a tool, just in order to help us understand and somehow make this practice that little bit easier. As always, thank you all so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it.